Are you wondering what are the best things to see and do in Rome, Italy? For many first-time visitors to Rome, the obvious answers might be the Colosseum, the Trevi Fountain, and the Vatican. But there are many more things that you should see on your first visit to Rome. If you're new to my channel, I'm Alyssa, publisher of the RomeWise website and this YouTube channel. I've lived in Rome since 2001, I'm married to a Roman, and I can say that I know Rome like the back of my hand. I just want to share with you what I think are those must-see sites that you should try to fit into a first visit to Rome, whether you're here for just a day, 3 days, or even longer. So we can call these things must-see, bucket list items, whatever you want to call them. These are just some of the most famous sites and monuments that I think any first-time visitor should see when they visit Rome. And like any list, of course my list is subjective. And if you've been following me, you probably know by now how much I love Rome. And as you might imagine, there are probably 30, if not 100 things that I think you should see when you visit Rome. But for most people, a typical visit to Rome is 1, 2, or 3 days. In fact, on this channel, I have suggested itineraries for 1, 2, and 3 days in Rome. So I recommend you watch those videos if you want to see how I would organize these must-see sites in those time frames. Alessandro and I ran a bed and breakfast in Rome for 17 years. In that time, we used to give a lot of hand-holding advice, and we would share with our guests how they should best approach a visit to Rome. We would sit down with our guests with a map and take a highlighter and show them what we called our reconnaissance walk, which would allow somebody to walk through the historic center and see a lot of these must-see sites. And then when a guest would check out, they'd come to the counter, and very often I would say, well, what did you think? Did you do the walk? What did you think of the Pantheon? What did you think of Piazza Navona? And I cannot tell you how many times the guest would answer me with, we just didn't make it over there. We didn't get to the Pantheon. We'll just see it another time. And I would think, how is that even possible? And I mean that twofold. First of all, the Pantheon is smack in the middle of the historic center of Rome, and it's really close to a lot of the other sites like the Spanish Steps, the Trevi Fountain, Piazza Navona, etc. Second of all, the Pantheon is such an important ancient monument. It's my all-time favorite monument in Rome, and I couldn't imagine visiting Rome and not seeing the Pantheon. So whether you follow some of my suggested itineraries as I've laid them out in some of the videos on this site or also on the RomeWise website, here is my list of must-see sites when you visit Rome, and I hope that you can fit them in to your visit. The Colosseum is probably the #1 monument that people want to see when they visit Rome. The official name of the Colosseum is the Flavian Amphitheater. 3 emperors made up the Flavian dynasty: Domitian, Titus, and their father Vespasian. Vespasian, followed by his son Titus, built the Colosseum in just 9 years between the years 70 and 79 CE. It was inaugurated in the year 80 with 100 days of games. And by games, I mean pretty gruesome things like executions, animal hunts, gladiatorial fights, etc. After nearly 2,000 years, the Colosseum still stands today. If you want to learn what there was in ancient Rome before the Colosseum, check out my video about the Domus Aurea. And I've done a whole video all about how the Colosseum was built, so you can watch that if you want more details. In fact, you won't want to miss my Colosseum playlist because that's where I have detailed videos all about how to get tickets, the best tickets to get, where to eat near the Colosseum, etc. And as I say in many of my videos, you do not have to go inside the Colosseum if you don't want to. You can see a lot of it from the outside. Your ticket to the Colosseum comes with entrance to the Roman Forum and Palatine Hill. If you book a tour of the Colosseum through the Colosseum, then you're just going to be able to visit the Roman Forum and Palatine Hill on your own. But if you book a tour of the Colosseum with an outside tour company, usually this also includes a tour of the Roman Forum and part of the Palatine Hill. But if you just purchase a ticket to the Colosseum, you can visit the Roman Forum and Palatine Hill on your own. And the great news is that with any of the Colosseum tickets, you can visit the Roman Forum and Palatine Hill. It's one park, that's why I keep saying them together. Up to 24 hours on either side of your Colosseum visit. I'm keeping the Roman Forum and Palatine Hill as one item, one must-see place to visit, because they are connected and you cannot re-enter this park on the same ticket. I have several videos on this channel all about visiting the Roman Forum and the Palatine Hill and some of the sites inside, so you can check those out if you want more details. But whether or not you go inside the Colosseum, I urge you to go inside of the Roman Forum and Palatine Hill, especially if you're interested in ancient Rome, because this is really the heart of ancient Rome. The Roman Forum was essentially downtown city life in ancient Rome. It was used and built up over several centuries, so many of the buildings and monuments you see in the Roman Forum came from different eras. One of ancient Rome's most famous citizens, Julius Caesar, left a lot of traces of himself in the Roman Forum. While it's part of the same park as the Roman Forum, the Palatine Hill is in fact a whole different area to visit. The Palatine was one of the original 7 hills of Rome, and it's where we get the word palace from. Some of Rome's emperors built grandiose palaces on the Palatine Hill, and we can visit them today. If you want to know more, check out my video all about the Domus Tiberiana. In many ways, you really can't miss the Via dei Fori Imperiali, or the Street of the Imperial Fora. First of all, if you're visiting the Colosseum and the Roman Forum and Palatine Hill, it would be hard to miss this road because it's the main road that leads up to these sites. And the second reason you can't miss the Via dei Fori Imperiali is because I consider it a must-see when you visit Rome. I do know that some people arrive at the Colosseum and the Roman Forum and Palatine Hill from the other side, and in that case, you would in fact miss the Via dei Fori Imperiali, so I hope you'll make it a point to visit this beautiful road. The Via dei Fori Imperiali means Street of the Imperial Fora, or Forums, and this is where you can see the ruins of several of Rome's emperors. If you walk down the Via dei Fori Imperiali from the Colosseum towards Piazza Venezia, you will see one of these fora on the left-hand side and 3 of them on the right-hand side. An imperial forum is different from the Roman Forum. The Roman Forum, as I said, was basically where downtown city life was in ancient Rome. An imperial forum was basically the government center of the ruling emperor of the moment. Inside of an imperial forum, an emperor would have built for him tribunals, temples, libraries, and more. The forum on the left-hand side is the forum of Julius Caesar, who was not an emperor, he was a dictator. You might notice that the forum of Julius Caesar is actually connected to the Roman Forum. So when you visit the Roman Forum, make sure to make your way over to the Curia Julia, the Curia or the Senate House of Julius Caesar, and past it into Julius Caesar's Forum. There's actually not a lot left from the time of Julius Caesar, but we can see what's left of the temple to Venus Genetrix. Venus was the goddess of love in the Roman Pantheon, and the word genetrix is in reference to Julius Caesar's belief that he was descended from the goddess Venus through her son, the Trojan war hero Aeneas. On the other side of the Via dei Fori Imperiali, we have 3 imperial forums. The Forum of Emperor Nerva is pretty small, but it's worth taking a closer look at the forums of Emperors Augustus and Trajan. Augustus was, of course, Rome's first emperor, and his forum is pretty well intact considering how ancient it is. We can see the remains of what was once a basilica, which was an architectural shape. A basilica was a building where government matters were handled. Typically, a basilica consisted of a frontal staircase leading up to a long central nave that had 2 side naves, and at the end, an exedra or an apse where a judge or the emperor himself would sit. Later, when Constantine made Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire, they simply co-opted these basilicas and turned them into churches. Further along, we can see the largest and the newest of the imperial fora, the Forum of Emperor Trajan. If you go to the edge and look closely at the column of Emperor Trajan, you can see that it tells a story. Wrapping up around the sides of the column, you can see the story of Trajan's defeat over Dacia, which is today Romania. The statue of St. Peter at the top of this column has of course nothing to do with ancient Rome. It was placed here in the late 1500s by Pope Sixtus V. It's a little-known fact that you can actually visit these imperial fora from below when you visit the Roman Forum. They're all connected. As I mentioned, you can visit the Forum of Julius Caesar, but if you keep going underneath the Via dei Fori Imperiali, you can visit the Forum of Trajan. You can also exit at the Forum of Trajan, and it is also an entrance. So this is one of the sort of secret entrance points to the Roman Forum. By the way, I really meant that you should see the Via dei Fori Imperiali, the street. I didn't mean that you have to go visit these imperial fora from below. It's just that you can visit them if you're visiting the Roman Forum. But a walk along the Via dei Fori Imperiali, especially at sunrise or sunset and in winter, is really special, and I think gives you this sense of ancient Rome. For me, a must-see site for any visitor, especially a first-time visitor, is Capitoline Hill or Campidoglio. Capitoline Hill is one of the original 7 hills of Rome and arguably one of the most important. This is where the Romans built their temple to Jupiter Optimus Maximus. In ancient Rome, the temple faced over the Roman Forum. Over the centuries, the temple deteriorated, but today you can see parts of it inside of the Capitoline museums. Capitoline Hill itself fell into disuse and it just became a big pile of rubble. In the late 1500s, Pope Paul III was getting the city ready for a visit by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. He tapped the best architect of the day, Michelangelo, to redesign Campidoglio. And so, the beautiful design of Campidoglio that you see today is Michelangelo's design. One very important thing Michelangelo did was to change the orientation of Campidoglio. In ancient Rome, the temple to Jupiter Optimus Maximus faced over the Roman Forum so the people could look up and see the temple from below. Michelangelo completely changed the orientation of the piazza and turned it 180 degrees so that the piazza faced towards the city, the new city of Rome, and the Vatican. One curious thing to note about the Piazza di Campidoglio is that the floor pattern that you see was in fact Michelangelo's, but it wasn't completed until 1940 under orders from Benito Mussolini. Another thing to note in Piazza del Campidoglio is the bronze equestrian statue of Emperor Marcus Aurelius. The statue in the piazza is actually a replica. The original is inside of the Capitoline museums. Regardless, it's still a remarkable thing to see because bronze statues from antiquity haven't survived very much, and this is one of those rare pieces that did survive. And the reason that this bronze statue survived and wasn't melted down is because it was mistaken for Emperor Constantine. Speaking of Emperor Constantine, while it's not necessarily a must-see, while you're up here on Capitoline Hill, you should go around the back and check out the enormous, colossal statue of Constantine that's been placed there. It's free to visit, and I think it's a pretty cool thing to see. At the time I'm making this video for you, Piazza Venezia is under construction, and it's due to be under construction for at least another 10 years. In this piazza, they're digging to create a new metro stop, and I think this project is just going to be really, really long because you know what happens every time they dig in Rome? They keep finding things from ancient Rome, so it's a very delicate process. In any case, if you're visiting these sites that I'm telling you about, the Via dei Fori Imperiali and Campidoglio, you are bound to see what's going on in Piazza Venezia, so I just wanted to acknowledge it. The next must-see site that I think is on every visitor's list is the Trevi Fountain. The Trevi Fountain is a monumental fountain, which means that it marks the terminus of an aqueduct. 2 other famous monumental fountains we have in Rome include the Fontanone high on the Gianicolo Hill and the Moses Fountain in Largo Santa Susana near Piazza della Repubblica. As a first-time visitor to Rome, you may be wondering how to visit the Trevi Fountain, what time of day, when you can see it without all of those crowds. Well, I don't have a good answer for you anymore. I used to be able to say, come down here at about 6 in the morning. That is no longer the case. Now at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, you're going to see people down there. We've got a lot of people on social media that want to get their pictures and their videos in. So the Trevi Fountain has become crowded almost 24/7. On the other hand, I have a feeling that if you were to come here in really low season, and by the way, we barely have a low season anymore, but if you came in low season and came to the Trevi Fountain really early in the morning, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, maybe 5 o'clock, you might be able to find it without the crowds. And in some controversial news, at the time I'm making this video for you, they are floating a plan to charge a fee to visit the Trevi Fountain. Wait a second, I'm going to explain. Yes, the piazza is very small, and yes, it is full of shops and restaurants, so you can't really charge a fee for people to enter the piazza where the Trevi Fountain is. What they're talking about possibly doing is to charge a fee, a very small fee, like 1 or 2 euros, for people to get down to that fence that's right along the basin. They're trying to keep people from congregating there, sort of clogging up all the space, making their videos, etc. And they're definitely trying to keep people from trying to eat down there, which is not allowed in any case. If they do implement this fee, they're saying that it will remain free for Rome residents. That includes me. They're also saying that they would probably only do it during peak hours, maybe during the day. I don't know yet. This is really just in the beginning stages, and it might not happen at all. But I'm just sharing this with you because it is being talked about quite a lot. But despite the crowds, I really do think you should come and see the Trevi Fountain because it is unique, it is a symbol of Rome, and it's absolutely beautiful. The Spanish Steps is a monumental staircase linking the Church of Trinità dei Monti at the top of the hill to the Spanish Embassy to the Holy See at the bottom of the hill. It's made up of 135 steps and is considered the longest and the widest staircase in Europe. Before the staircase was built in the early 1720s by Francesco de Sanctis and Alessandro Specchi, there was nothing but a hill covered with rubble that linked the French church at the top with the Spanish embassy to the Holy See at the bottom. The fountain at the bottom of the Spanish Steps is called La Barcaccia, which means the ugly boat, which I don't agree with. The fountain was designed about 100 years prior to the staircase in the early 1620s by Pietro Bernini, who was the father of Gian Lorenzo Bernini. There's a chance that the young Bernini probably helped his father. The Roman aqueduct that feeds this fountain is the same one that feeds the Trevi Fountain, the Acqua Vergine. The Spanish Steps used to be a place where tourists like to come and sit down, have a gelato. This is no longer allowed. Yes, I get people telling me every day, oh, but I saw people sitting on the steps. That is because there may not have been a police person in the vicinity, but it is not allowed to sit on the Spanish Steps, and it's definitely not allowed to eat or drink on them. If you're here at Christmas time, you might catch some Christmas trees on the Spanish Steps, but not always. But if you're here from late April to early May, that is when you can see the Spanish Steps covered in azaleas, and it's absolutely magical. Today, I think that most visitors to Rome just like taking pictures of the Spanish Steps. And if you're wondering when is the best time to do that, I would say late April to early May, although of course if you're not here during that time, any time is fine. But the best time of day to catch this beautiful staircase is early in the morning. Like the Trevi Fountain, the area around the Spanish Steps is actually full of things to see and do, but I think most people associate the Spanish Steps with shopping. This is where you're going to find those really big name brands, but also you're going to find some other smaller shops as well, so there's something for everyone. If you want to know more about the best places to shop in Rome, check out my page on the RomeWise website. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the Pantheon is my favorite monument in Rome, and it is, for me, a must-see. First of all, the Pantheon is the best preserved building we have from ancient Rome in Rome. Second of all, this building is a wonder of engineering. It still holds the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome. The first version of the Pantheon, which we can't see today, was built under Emperor Augustus by his right-hand man, Marcus Agrippa. It was built either in 27 BCE or 25 BCE, we're not quite sure, but this is right when Augustus had just become the first emperor of the Roman Empire. We know that the first iteration of the building was built under Agrippa because we can see the inscription across the top of the monument. Unfortunately, we don't have anything left of the first version of the Pantheon because it burnt to the ground. In the year 80, Emperor Domitian built a second version of the Pantheon on the site of the first one. Scholars actually thought that the version of the Pantheon that you see today was in fact built under Augustus by Agrippa. And as I said, this is because of the inscription across the top. It wasn't until the late 1800s that they were doing works on the Pantheon to fix part of the ceiling, and they found bricks inside of the coffered ceiling that indicated that the version of the Pantheon that we see today was actually built under Emperor Hadrian in the early 120 or so. So then why is there an inscription to Agrippa? Well, it is possible that Hadrian was simply paying homage to its original builders. In any case, in the year 609, the Pantheon was turned into a church. And this is what saved it, and it's why we can see it today. Through antiquity, into the Middle Ages, and even the Renaissance, ancient Roman buildings were plundered for materials, and the Pantheon would have suffered a similar fate. It is in fact today a church, and you can attend Mass there. Contrary to what many guidebooks and tour guides will tell you, the Pantheon is not a temple dedicated to all the gods. The word Pantheon is actually a later construction. We don't really know what the Pantheon was used for, so some people assume it might have been used as a temple, but actually it was probably used for other things, including a tribunal. In any case, I highly recommend going inside the Pantheon because it is truly a wondrous sight to see. Yes, the Pantheon did used to be free to visit. Now there is a €5 charge at the time of making this video. I've done a video about how you can order your tickets in advance. It's actually not that easy unless you're an EU citizen because the system doesn't really seem to take non-EU credit cards. But many people are finding that if they simply show up and go to the cash line, which is the line on the left-hand side of the monument as you face it, it moves pretty quickly and you'll be inside in just a few minutes. A visit inside only takes between 10 and 15 minutes, so you don't really need to spend that much time. But if you don't feel like going inside, at least admire the monument from the outside because, as I said, it really is a very special building from ancient Rome. Just a 3 to 5 minute walk away is Piazza Navona. Piazza Navona is arguably one of the most beautiful squares we have in Rome, and for me, it's a must-see. Today, the piazza is the best example of Roman Baroque architecture. The church of Sant'Agnese in Agone was partly designed by architect Francesco Borromini. The fountain in front of the church, called the Four Rivers Fountain, was designed by Borromini's rival, Gian Lorenzo Bernini. The obelisk on top of the fountain is actually an ancient Roman obelisk. It did not come from ancient Egypt. It was designed in ancient Rome. There are two fountains on either end of the piazza. One was designed by Gian Lorenzo Bernini and the other by Giacomo della Porta. But this piazza is more than just a showcase for Baroque beauty and architecture. Its history goes back to the days of the Roman Empire. If you take a good look at the shape of Piazza Navona, even while you're standing right in the middle of it, you'll see that the piazza takes its shape from what was once there almost 2,000 years ago, a stadium. While the father and son team of Vespasian and Titus built the Colosseum, Titus's brother Domitian built his stadium here. As you walk around Piazza Navona, you'll see signs for the Stadio Domiziano, meaning Domitian Stadium. And if you have time and you're really into the ancient stuff, you can head underneath Piazza Navona and visit this ruin. After the stadium fell into disuse with the fall of the Roman Empire, the whole place just became a big pile of rubble. Eventually, there was a market here in Piazza Navona. It has since moved over to Campo di Fiori. Starting in the 1600s under Pope Innocent X, who was a Pamphili, the piazza began to take on the look that you see now. On one end of the piazza stood the Palazzo Pamphili. It is today the Brazilian embassy. I've written a lot about the history of this piazza, and it's actually really fascinating. And there's a ghost or two involved as well. So come check out my page on the RomeWise website to learn more. And if you have time, don't miss popping into the church that stands on the piazza, Sant'Agnese in Agone. It is spectacular. Well, the last two sites that I want to share with you that I consider to be must-see sites when you visit Rome are not actually in Rome. Even though St. Peter's Basilica is in the heart of Vatican City, which is not part of Rome, I still consider it a must-see site when you visit Rome. St. Peter's Basilica is a Renaissance church and considered by many standards to be the largest in the world. Many architects had a hand in designing it, most notably Michelangelo. It's said that Michelangelo designed St. Peter's Basilica and Bernini decorated it. This is not entirely true, it's a little bit too simplistic, but it just should give you the idea of how amazing this church is and how much art you will find inside. The basilica is free to visit, although you will encounter lines to get in because you have to go through security first. I have lots of other dedicated videos about St. Peter's Basilica, including some of the things you can see and do there, like climb the dome, visit St. Peter's tomb, and see some hidden gems inside. At the very least, I think you should visit St. Peter's Basilica so you can see what I consider to be one of the most beautiful sculptures in the world, Michelangelo's Pietà. Michelangelo was a young, inexperienced 20-something artist when he got the commission to make this extraordinary sculpture. If you just do one thing in Vatican City, I suggest coming to St. Peter's Square and admiring St. Peter's Basilica from the outside. Even just visiting the square alone is a lot. There is so much to know about the history of this beautiful square. But I do recommend going inside. It is a unique work of architecture and beauty, and while the lines can be long, I think it is worth it to get inside and see this amazing church. And last but not least, the second site that is not in Rome, the Sistine Chapel. Like St. Peter's Basilica, the Sistine Chapel is also not in Rome. It is inside of Vatican City. Unlike St. Peter's Basilica, the Sistine Chapel is not free. You have to visit the Vatican museums and go all the way to the end of the museums to see the Sistine Chapel. If you've been following me for a while, you know that I have numerous videos all about how to visit the Vatican museums. Either way, I recommend watching my video about how to visit the Vatican museums first thing in the morning, beeline to the Sistine Chapel and see it before the crowds come, and then visit the rest of the museums on your own. Another great way to visit the Sistine Chapel is by taking a tour that includes a shortcut into St. Peter's Basilica. That way, you get to see these two must-see sites in one go. Why is the Sistine Chapel a must-see when you visit Rome? I may be a little biased because Michelangelo is my favorite artist of all time. But I believe that the art you see inside of the Sistine Chapel is among the most beautiful you'll ever see. In 1508, Pope Julius II decided that Michelangelo would be the one to paint the ceiling of this chapel. Remember, I just told you when talking about St. Peter's Basilica that Michelangelo was a sculptor. He did not consider himself to be a painter. And so, this talented young sculptor from Florence refused the Pope. And I think we all know who won that argument. It took Michelangelo 4 years to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. But his paintings are not the only ones inside the chapel. The Sistine Chapel is actually named for Pope Julius II's uncle, Pope Sixtus IV. And when Pope Sixtus IV decided that he wanted this chapel made for him, he called on the best artists of the day to decorate it. These artists came from Perugia and Florence to paint the side walls of the Pope's chapel. On one side, you can see the life of Jesus, and on the other side, the life of Moses. Many years later, in 1536, Michelangelo was again tapped to paint the back wall of the Sistine Chapel. He covered it with his Last Judgment. We can easily see that there is a huge difference in the way Michelangelo painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel with scenes from Genesis and the way he painted the Last Judgment. It wasn't just a matter of Michelangelo having gotten more experience. It was more a matter of the world having changed. The New World had just been discovered by Columbus. The Counter-Reformation was underfoot. And the horrible sack of Rome in 1527 had darkened Michelangelo's mood. I read comments from people all the time saying that when they visit the Sistine Chapel, they're often underwhelmed or disappointed. I think this is the result of several factors. The first being that there is such a high expectation for how amazing it is going to be, and I'm sitting here telling you that it's amazing. I think a second factor is the fact that it just takes so long to go through the Vatican museums that sometimes when you finally make it into the Sistine Chapel, there's something of an anticlimax. And I think the third factor is the crowds. So, what do you think about my list of top 10 sites you must see when you visit Rome? Have you visited them? Do you plan to visit them? Drop me a line in the comments below. I would love to hear from you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. If it's not your first time in Rome, or you have more days in Rome, or you're a turbo sightseer and you want to see more stuff, check out my video on the top 10 things to see in Rome the second time.